Welcome Cloud Gurus to another episode of the Future of Tech. And have I got some buzzwords for you today? Bitcoin, blockchain, decentralization, bitminers, and more. Yes, we're talking about the latest way of storing data that pushes technology and how we think of it. We will look into the background, why we need this new technology, how you can start using it today, and how large companies and projects are relying on blockchain's promises to build next generation software. This is the Future of Tech, the most decentralized show that mines your brain for spare IQ points. Now let's start with talking about trust. If you think about it, who on the internet do you really trust with your data? The answer is probably very few, if any. Yet you are daily entering personal data into systems that you have no control over. Systems that have been made by people with varying degrees of integrity. Once you have given that data, you have given up any control of it, and you rely on trust to uphold the security and safety of that data. Now, there are a few systems we do tend to trust, such as banks, but it is very centralized and only a few places holds the data. This is what blockchain sets out to change. And today we shall investigate how this paradigm shift is possible and what we can do to take advantage of it. Now, blockchain will solve all the issues of the future. No, not really. So what is it? Why are large companies going gaga over this technology? Blockchain was invented by Satoshi Nakamoto in 2008 to support the digital currency Bitcoin without the need for a central trusted authority, such as a bank. It was implemented the following year by Nakamoto as a core component of the cryptocurrency and used the words block and chain separately. In fact, it wasn't even called blockchain at that time. That was much later. Now, the term came later when it was realized that the technology could be used in other ways than purely for digital currencies. Bitcoin was the first digital currency to come up with a solution to the double spending problem without requiring a bank or another trusted authority. Now, that name, remember I said before that Satoshi Nakamoto? We don't really know who it is. In fact, it could be more than one person. Believe it or not, keen individuals have trawled through timestamps of forum posts by Nakamoto to determine which time zone they might be in, analyzed the language used by Nakamoto, and much more. Whoever he, she, or they are, this all adds to the mystery that often surrounds blockchain technology. Now, the building blocks and properties of blockchain technology, there's a few we need to have, under our belt. So first of all, there's blocks. As the name implies, blockchain is a chain of blocks or records that are all linked using modern cryptography hashing standards like SHA-256 or SHA-3. Each block is a collection of transactions and can vary in size depending on the system and implementation, but generally around 1 megabyte in size on average. If you look across all the uses of blockchain, that is. Usually a cryptographic hash value of the previous block is stored in the next block. So this iterative process confirms the integrity of the previous block, and all the way back to the original Genesis block, which is the very first block of the system. Then we have something called block time. The block time is the average time it takes for the network to generate one extra block in the blockchain. Some blockchains create a new block as frequently as every 5 seconds. By the time of block completion, the included data becomes verifiable. If we talk about cryptocurrency, this is more or less when a money transaction takes place. So a shorter block time means faster transactions. Then we have the ledger. The real power of blockchain, being integrity of data, comes through the public ledger of a blockchain. Now, the ledger records all transactions of the blockchain and stores them as a distributed system, often through a peer-to-peer network. This means that everyone on the network has a copy of the ledger. Yes, everyone. And they have agreed on a protocol for maintaining and adding to it, such a set of metadata. In other words, one person cannot alter the ledger, for example, to steal all the bitcoins, because it would be immediately flagged as false. This makes auditing of the ledger very simple and inexpensive, something that has great appeal to companies looking to boost confidence in their system processes. Now, you might have heard of Bitcoin mining. Is where you make all the millions, right? Counting your money. Bitcoin mining. Now, whatever the topic of digital currency has come up, we hear about mining, and mining refers to the process of calculating the hashes of blocks and validating the transactions within the blockchain. Mining requires huge amounts of computation to validate the hashes of the blocks quickly, and once validation is complete, this is added to each block, and the entire blockchain is updated. In a digital currency like Bitcoin, miners are rewarded with a fraction of a Bitcoin, often an incredibly small fraction, for their work. This is because in effect the miners are assisting in the integrity of the entire system. So how can I use blockchains in my project or business and harvest the goodness of magic unicorns? Well, just hang on a minute, okay? Before we get to the implementation path of your own blockchain magic, you need to ask yourself the question, is this the right tool for the job? As with any other project. As well as we'll get to that in just a minute, but there are scenarios where you don't want to use blockchain. As crazy as that sounds, it's easy to get caught up in all the hype and wanting to use blockchain for all the things. But before you start the implementation and going down that decentralized path, ask yourself and the project team these questions. Do you need a shared public database? Can all the data be in a shared space between the users of the system? Are there multiple parties involved? Does the system need to communicate and create transactions between separate parties? Can these parties not be trusted? That's important. Do you actually not trust them? Can the parties play by the same set of rules and protocols? Can everybody implement the same system essentially? Do you need an immutable transaction log? A log that can't be changed no matter what, and any attempt to do so will be flagged immediately. Will the system follow the same rules in the long run? Because there's no going back once the blockchain is implemented. If you can answer yes to all of those questions, then your project might be a candidate for blockchain. Now, blockchain doesn't solve all your problems. It's good for some things. To implement a new blockchain, there are both frameworks and libraries to help you get started. No one wants to write their own blockchain implementation unless it's their core business, and then probably not even then. Some of the most popular frameworks and libraries include something called Hyperledger, which is, the link is here, an open source project which is supported by both the Linux Foundation and IBM, and it offers multiple implementations and development strategies for doing blockchain projects. There's Etherium from the Etherium project. That's not confusing, is it? Anyway, this uses smart contracts, which we'll get to in just a minute, and is based on the Solidity programming language. It is a Turing-complete language used for multiple different sectors and application domains. There's something called MultiChain, which is an open platform for building blockchains very fast, and it's a simple and very, very well documented way for developers to get started. There are a ton more though. There's a lot of blockchain frameworks and libraries, and some are built for large enterprises, some are built to start your new digital currency, some are very developer specific, some are for specific programming languages, and so on. You create both public and private blockchains. Public are the likes of Bitcoin and Ethereum, where private implementations are just that, they're private. They exist within enterprises and companies, and arguably you lose some of that distributed goodness that promises a safe and trusted system. However, companies can have genuine reasons to implement their own. Now, chances are that there will be a framework or open source library that will suit your project and team. Otherwise, just build it yourself. No, not really. One of the really cool added benefits of having a blockchain implementation is the lack of need for permissions. An open public blockchain network guards itself against any nefarious players and no access control is needed to add new applications and functions. Remember that everyone in the same blockchain implementation has to play by the same rules. So if you aren't the system, we'll flag your bad blocks and spit them out. This isn't adopted by all blockchain implementations, and Bitcoin, for example, requires new entries on the blockchain to provide a proof of work to allow any new blocks on the chain to ensure the permissionless nature. Remember I said that once something is in the blockchain ledger, it cannot be removed or changed. Remember? That was at the start. Because the ledger is distributed, everyone has a copy, and any change in one instance will be marked as void. Well, this can be both good and bad. Good because it keeps everyone honest and it is secure. Bad because the data is there forever. That's a long time. It's a long time. The European Union has put into effect the General Data Protection Regulation, or more simply, GDPR. It's a move to protect consumers from massive collection of personal data as seen by Facebook, Google, and many, many other companies. Companies have collected data because they could, and not necessarily because they should. As a result, consumers will now have certain new rights. Number one, customers own their data, not the companies. So your name and address and height and favorite animal and everything else along those lines is now your property. Number 2, customers can request revisions to their own data. Any piece of information that you own, see number 1 above, can be changed and updated. And number 3, customers can request to be completely forgotten and their data deleted. It's your data, so you can also have it removed. Now you see the problem when it comes to the blockchain technology? Number 1 and 2, we can deal with that. We can issue update transactions to pieces of data that then gets added to a block and eventually the chain. There will be an audit trail of the change, but that's okay. But how do we delete data from the blockchain? Remember, we can't go back and delete any transactions or blocks on the chain. There's no real solution to this problem yet, and companies using blockchains in their systems and products need to be very aware of these rules. It can really make or break a product and a solution. And GDPR is just the first major regulation to have a real impact on blockchain technology. Because the technology is so green and fresh, there is no real proper regulation of that area. In particular for digital or cryptocurrencies, it's a real wild, wild west at times. New cryptocurrencies are created at a high frequency, and uneducated investors or speculators have little or no protection. There are entire websites even dedicated to pushing the price of a cryptocurrency way, way up in order to make a few people very, very rich quickly. Now, some new digital currencies are very similar to a pyramid or Ponzi scheme, which promises fast and easy wealth without having an actual product. Bad. Now, people are lured into investing as they build a fear of missing out on the next Bitcoin craze. Some countries in response to this have taken to extreme measures and banned Bitcoins and other cryptocurrencies altogether. Bolivia and Ecuador have said that they will ban these currencies until proper legislation has gone into effect. And in Bangladesh, using virtual currency, just using it of any kind, is treated as money laundering, and you can actually be jailed for it. By far the most countries allow use and possession of digital currencies though, but only because the vast majority have little or no regulation in place to say you can't or can. While countries and governments are coming to grip with the impact of blockchain technologies, it is as much about the companies using blockchain to understand just where the law can affect their products and services. It's not all just up to the lawmakers. Companies have to take some responsibility as well. Before we get into how blockchain can help shape the future, let's just kill off some of the myths around the technology. Today's currencies will soon disappear. Of course they won't. At least not due to digital currencies. There are inherent issues with Bitcoin itself, such as limitation in transaction processing time, currently at 10 minutes, that's when a block is created, and a maximum of 7 transactions per second. To increase transaction concurrency, you'd have to increase processing time, which means buying anything in a shop would be just unfeasible. Who wants to wait 45 minutes in line to buy a can of Coke, for the money to be transferred? Anything decentralized is indestructible. Well, that may seem that way. That if a blockchain is stored on each network node, that the special services or authorities can't just shut down Bitcoin on a whim. Inasmuch there is no centralized server or something similar. They have no one to go to if they want to shut it all down. That is just kind of an illusion though. All independent miners are merged into pools, or technically they're called cartels, which I kind of like. I don't know why, but They have to merge on the assumption that it's better to have a small but stable income than a huge payoff maybe every 1,000 years. Who wants that? The top 4 pools in Bitcoin actually control more than 50% of all computing power for mining Bitcoin. And gaining access to just 4 controlling computers would gain someone the ability to double spend Bitcoins, for example, which would probably bring the currency to its knees. The anonymous and open character of the blockchain is a good thing. Is it really? Maybe sometimes, but if you know the public key signature of an individual, which you wouldn't need to send them any money, you can track that key throughout the blockchain, because remember, you have the whole blockchain. And if we talk about Bitcoin again, this means anyone could see everything you've spent money on, including that collection of mid-1980s Star Trek paper models you are secretly collecting. Now, for individuals, this might be less of an issue, but for companies, it's a big no-no. Sales, customers, account balances, and much more would be free to view to anyone. By far the best known use of blockchain is Bitcoin, which most people have at least heard of. And we've already mentioned a number of times this time on this show. In order to use digital currencies such as Bitcoin, consumers will need an account for others to send money to and to be able to send money from. This account is generally known as a wallet. which is a private-public encryption key pair. Look that up if you don't know what that is. You must keep your private key safe and secure, as that identifies the account and lets anyone get full access. This private key identifies you on the blockchain as well. So you might have heard of the horror stories of people losing their private key to bitcoins they bought long ago for very little money. However, now they're worth thousands, tens of thousands, sometimes millions of dollars. And I mentioned identification, but in fact people are completely anonymous on the blockchain unless you know who the public key belongs to. And there's no register of who owns that private key or wallet, so if you find out though, you'd know. This has made the currency attractive to crypto lockers and other criminals. However, Bitcoin and digital currencies aren't the only industry or product using blockchain, of course. Now, at the start, I mentioned something called smart contracts. They're blockchain-based, smart contracts. They're contracts that can be partially or fully executed or enforced without human interaction. So they're almost kind of automated. And the best way to describe smart contracts is to compare the technology to a vending machine. I know, it's not a chocolate bar, but bear with me, okay? Ordinarily, you would go to a lawyer or a notary, pay them, wait while you get the documents that they're supposed to give you. With smart contracts, you simply drop a Bitcoin into the vending machine, or in this case, ledger, and your escrow, driver's license, or whatever, drops into your account. More so, smart contracts not only define the rules and penalties around an agreement in the same way that a traditional contract does, but also automatically enforces those obligations. Now with healthcare, there is an MIT project called MedRec, medical record, which is putting electronic medical records into blockchains. This will ensure authentication and confidentiality in those records, as well as making data sharing much more reliable. And we definitely want that for our personal medical records. Other companies are also offering decentralized patient records with their technology. The American Center for Disease Control, or the CDC, is tracking disease outbreaks using blockchain technology, and they estimate it will improve the effectiveness and response in disaster relief scenarios. And that we want. That's very cool. Now, we've already discussed Bitcoin, but other large financial entities are also looking into the technology. Barclays, which is a large UK bank, has launched a number of blockchain initiatives involving tracking financial transactions, compliance, and combating fraud, which is also a good thing. The Danish shipping company Maersk, yay Denmark, is using blockchain for their marine insurance products. And according to Wikipedia, I know, I'm quoting Wikipedia, I apologize, but it was good. Major portions of the financial industry are implementing distributed ledgers for use in banking, and according to a September 2016 IBM study, this is occurring faster than expected. So it's being adopted. This is an interesting development and seems to indicate that banks are seeing a threat to both their business model and their methods of operation. What about food? Food, blockchain, food? And we can do that. If you're in the food industry, one of the risks is to have to deal with bad food batches, whether you're growing apples or producing canned tuna. This is such a critical point in instances where an issue of contamination arises, as an example, and you have to do a recall. Blockchain can help with food traceability, which is recording where food came from, such as which crate or which field or maybe even which tree. Obviously not the tuna, the apple. Anyway. In a lot of countries, voting is not compulsory, and many people just choose not to vote for one reason or another. The thought has been for a while, if you made it easier to vote, either from your home, on the couch, yay, or anonymously, more people would, and you would get a better representation of the people's opinion. For example, the tech nonprofit Democracy Earth Foundation set up a digital process that allowed Colombian expats, so people of Colombian nationality, not living in Colombia, who were unable to vote through the official process or having an opportunity to participate in a plebiscite on whether to approve a peace treaty. This process has raised interesting questions for governments about the future use of blockchain in electoral processes and in the public sector more broadly, and could potentially lead to many new ways to ensure that integrity and inclusiveness of the election process. Very cool. We need more people voting. Go vote. So let's end this segment with fashion. I knew that was the one you were waiting for. The company Permanence has, in collaboration with the Danish designer Martine Hjalgaard, proved blockchain's potential for forging greater trust in business along a fashion supply chain. I know. They've enabled brands to provide verified information about the materials, processes, and people behind products. No more child labor here. The first garment ever tracked with blockchain technology was presented at the Copenhagen Fashion Summit's Solution Lab in Denmark of May 2017. I was there, as you can tell. The journey information of the clothing was made accessible via the Garmin's Smart label, and this served as a proof of concept of blockchain's implementation in fashion supply chains. Very cool. Before we end, I would love to hear more from you on what you like about this show and what you want to see more of. What do you don't like? And how can I give you that last piece of that 1980s space Lego set that you are desperately seeking? You can find me on Twitter at LarsClint, or through the Cloud Guru Facebook page or other social media accounts. Thanks for watching The Future of Tech, the show that steals the bitcoins you left under your doormat. See you next time.